Well, greetings and felicitations, everyone. Welcome to the program. It's been a while, and we're back today. Welcome, Wendy. Good to see you, as always.
Good to see you, my fellow podcaster hubby. How are you?
Thank you. And I've got the wrong graphic up, of course. That's for later in the show.
Oh,
But I was just going to put that one up for a moment.
You gave something away.
I gave something away. So, if you saw that, erase it. Or I can say like a judge in court. Jury, we would like you to disregard that visual you just saw. That's for later in the trial. So you are stunning as ever, by the way. Thank you.
Very kind of you to say thank you, kind sir. And may I say right back at you.
Why, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't hear that often these days. So that's kind of nice, So I appreciate that. So, folks, today, as you saw by that little graphic at the beginning of the show, I'll throw it up one more time because I like it so much. There's Wendy and me,
cool.
and the Fire of London of 1066 in the background. Now, everybody, you know this show. If you've been a regular listener to this show for any period of time, you know that Wendy and I tend to talk about relationship stuff predominantly. I would say 99.5% of the time, because we've done a couple of shows on, I think, of witchcraft, or a couple of shows on history and things like that. And really, when we devised this show, Wendy, wasn't it? Hey, we're going to do some relationship stuff, but we're gonna do history, and we're going to do relationship, which is one of the things. And it became the predominant thing.
It was like they want the relationship stuff, you say, but we thought, no, we need to go back to some of the historical and paranormal stuff too.
Yes, we do. And so this is kind of again, a few weeks where we have been off, and we are back. I just want to say hi to people who are here. Val Rasnick is here. Good to see you, Val. And we saw Everin Smith a little earlier. And who else we got? Carlene is here. And Allison. And Professor Bauer is here. So it's good to see you, Professor Bauer. And everybody else who's filing in, good to have you here today. And let me take this graphic down and just put up the all-important. You wish you could do these things simultaneously, or that I had a producer that was doing this for us. But there's our all-important.
I know how you feel. I have the same problem.
Yes. There was only one radio show. No, I take it back. In my early days, we had a producer back in 2000 to 2009, somewhere in there. Yeah. And then I started doing my own producing, because it was like, you can have a show here, but we can't give you a producer. Okay. And then we had a producer when we were with KGRA, John Ward and I, and John Ward and Rocky Stucci and I doing the Situation Room, and Race Hobbs produced for us and owned the station. And that was always fun because we didn't have to worry about anything. Cue number 27, please. And he would play whatever clip that was. So we are doing our own thing over here.
We are.
Yeah, we are. I like you in red, by the way. You look good in red.
Thank you. I wore black on Sunday, and I thought, as we're talking about fire, passion,
I wore my red tie.
We're matching.
And we don't match. We're matching, you said. And I said,
matching. Scotty, you do look really handsome.
Why, thank you. I wasn't grubbing for a compliment.
But it works. It works, baby.
Just saying. All right. Well, that's good to hear. And it's the dimple in my tie, isn't it? It's an important feature.
I think it's all round, all over, darling.
Why, thank you, my dear.
I think it's all
over. It means
over.
a lot to me. Susie Q, welcome. Sandra Saunders, welcome.
Sandra.
So let's pour into this history. I love history. You know I do. You love history.
Getting the glasses on, because it's going to be like important.
Yeah, you got to put it here. I could put these on, but this is my my up close painting glasses, and they don't do any good for me on the computer. So so I'm going to rely heavily on your historical expertise here. I could talk about the Fire of London, the 1066 fire, which, by the way, and you're going to address this, I thought it was very interesting. What was it? August 2nd, 1066. There were 6 people who died, and that was it, in the Great Fire of London.
2nd of September, actually.
2nd of September. September.
So actually, this week, because we're now on the 3rd of October, 3rd of September. We'll get it right in a minute. So on the we're on the 3rd, but on the 2nd of September, in the early hours of 1666, not that far from me, a fire started in London, and over the course of the next few days, it spread right across the city, causing widespread destruction, and it changed London forever. Like when the Great Fire happened, it changed London. It really changed it completely. And a lot of people say that London, we'd come out of Elizabeth I and gone into James I of England, and then Charles I, then Charles II, and we'd had Oliver Cromwell when he'd been here and kept England very much down and couldn't do this, couldn't do that, because we were a republic back then.
Right. And of course, you are looking at something that, to put it in a little bit of perspective, Queen Elizabeth I, she died in like 1604 or 1605, if I'm not
very much
mistaken.
Early. It's around the early part. But I think it's
so
early.
This would be
15,
60 years later.
I think it's actually early. You've got me there. Let me just check that out.
And Shakespeare, right. I know it was in the early 1600s, the very early 1600s.
Death. She died in 1603.
03. And then Shakespeare was the Globe Theater burned down. He had his 1599 Globe Theater, and which was the big project we were working on for years to rebuild a replica of that here. And that burned down a few years later. Shakespeare, if you ever saw the movie All Is True, it was a movie with Kenneth Branagh, who does all those fabulous Shakespearean movies, and he actually played William Shakespeare in this movie at his retirement when he left London and went back to Stratford-upon-Avon. And a magnificent movie, if you haven't seen it. But so this, to put it in perspective, about 50 years after the death of Shakespeare, 60 years after the death of Queen Elizabeth I, somewhere in that range of time. And we can check our dates if we want to. This, by the way, is a painting that was done of the Great Fire of London right there. And I don't know to whom to attribute this painting. I've got to look it up a little bit to see what happened. But today, we're going to talk about the Fire of London. We're going to talk about some of the things that set that thing off. You can think of, when was the Great Fire of San Francisco? Or am I mixing that up with the Great Earthquake of San Francisco? We think of that in the last century, about 100 years ago, a little bit more. And that was a catastrophe here in almost modern day. This is 400 years ago. Well, 350 years ago.
Well, I think we should go back and take it to imagine London, if you can, in the year 1666. Okay. And it's very, very different to the London you would actually see today. So in that year, they'd had a very long, hot, dry summer. All the way throughout the bridge, buildings were close together. So you had on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other. You had, and they were all made of wood. All of them were, and thatch roofs and everything. And also you would have had a lot of straw and hay on the floor. There would have been a lot of rats and mice, and there'd have been a lot of poo and urine, and it would have smelled awful. But it's like, it would have been a very busy city. It would have been very hive of activity. And, Charles II had just come back. Really, he was recently back on the throne. So London was enjoying a renaissance. It was that we can be more indulgent. We can be more, we can have as much fun as we want. So if you can imagine that, this is a city that's coming back to life after the Republican. And they had no fire brigades in that time. There was no such thing as a firefighter or a fireman or anything like that. And there were some very strong winds coming in that particular early September when the fire began. And so we're going back. So it's a cozy night. We're on the 2nd of September. It's warm, but it's also quite blowy. And in a bakery in the heart of the city, because you have the West End of London, as we know now, and then we have the city. In the city of London, in a bakery in Pudding Lane, on the early hours of Sunday, the 2nd of September, 1666, a baker, Thomas Fariner, woke to the smell of smoke. A fire was raging in his bakery, and before the government set up an organised way to put out fire, people were trying to do it with buckets of water, which they got from the River Thames. This fire went on for 5 days. It destroyed half of the city, and smaller fires continued to burn until the following Sunday. In many parts of the city, the ground was just so hot they couldn't even walk on it for several days. And there would have been blind panic, absolute blind panic.
I had read that that chaos just broke out. Obviously, all these wood timber structures, and as you might see, even today, a house goes on fire, and the next house next door, everybody's in absolute disarray, and they sent word to the king. It was Samuel Pepys, who was a clerk of the Privy Seal. I'm sorry. He hurried off to inform King Charles II, and the king immediately ordered that all the houses in the path of the fire should be pulled down to create a fire break. And this was done with hooked poles, but to no avail as the fire outstripped them all. And so they went to great extremes, and even the piles of buildings that they pulled down burned to a crisp as well.
Well, also because the buildings were made of timber, as you rightly said, but they were also covered in a very flammable substance called pitch, which basically means a thatched roof. And they're so tightly packed together that there was about 350,000 people in London at that point. And it was one of the largest cities in Europe. And also, if you can imagine, the streets would have been buzzing with people all night, every day, throughout the day. And there were lots of animals there too. You're talking horses, people riding horses, dogs, cats, etc. And also there was so much straw and hay. You're looking at timber box.
Think of thatched roof, the roofing alone.
Also with a hot summer, you and I are both aware of that. When there's a hot summer, there's a drought, water becomes scarce, and the wooden houses get really dry. And it makes them easier to burn. So literally, they didn't know what to do. No fire brigade, no firefighting. All they would do is try and chop it down or squirt some water at it. And that's what they started to do.
Yes. And but of course, to none avail. And what is, I think, one of the most astounding things that you told me, which I didn't realize, was only 6 people died.
Yeah, they reckon only between 6 to 8 people lost their life. And I think, that was amazing considering it was a blazing inferno 3 hours after the fire first started.
Yes.
And, the thing is, if you imagine back that time, fires happened all the time. So people weren't bothered. They were just like, oh, well, it's another fire. Let's go back to sleep. However, because of the wind, the fire was pushing down Pudding Lane and onto Fish Hill and down towards the River Thames. And it spread so rapidly that by the time it reached the Thames, it hit then warehouses that were stocked with oil and tallow and things like that. But it didn't go south. Obviously, I'm in the south of the river.
Right.
It didn't come south of the river because if it had, that would have been north. But Samuel Pepys is absolutely a very famous guy. He's a very famous diarist. And obviously he was alive and he watched this go on. He was clerk to the Royal Navy. And he said to the king, as you rightly say, let's pull them down. And they said, use fire hooks to pull them down, before. But the fire, even when they were doing that, the fire continued to spread. And the one thing we know about fire It's alive. It's got its own energy. It's got its
Yeah.
own power. And if you watch a fire take hold, it loves what it does. It loves to burn. It loves to eat. And with, oxygen as well, and all that dryness, the fire would be going, enjoying itself. But people had a choice whether to evacuate, bury what they had, or hide what valuables they had. And Samuel Pepys absolutely buried, if you can believe this, his expensive cheeses and wines, and took all his belongings to Bethnal Green before he left. So you got a raging fire going, but the most important thing you do is get out in that garden and start digging and putting your expensive cheese and wine and your belongings
Right.
in.
Start burying your goods.
Uh-huh.
That's crazy to me. So,
because obviously there would be looters. They wouldn't care.
I suppose, yeah.
They wouldn't care that if there was a fire there. They'd be like, this is a great excuse. And people might, there was a terrible fire a couple of years ago. People probably saw it in June. A couple of years ago, Grenfell Tower block went up. It had flammable outer cladding. And it was so flammable, the building went up and people died and they were trapped inside. It was awful. And recently we had another fire in London. Actually, I think this one was more on the Essex border. Same flammable cladding that they were trying to take off, and it went up again. So I think that when you see things in modern days like that, imagine being in back then. People were peeing in the streets.
Right.
Were sleeping in the streets. There were rats and mice. People were just. It was a different world, and London wasn't the great, cosmopolitan city that it is now. It was a very smelly, dirty town, although it had a lot of great people living there. But it would have been full of disease.
I would compare it to now a couple of centuries later. You think of New York, and specifically a movie comes to mind. If you ever saw The Gangs of New York,
Never saw that. Never
with
seen it.
DiCaprio was in it, and a couple of other familiar. Daniel Day-Lewis was in that, and it's all about the gangs in a little area of New York known as the 5 Points, and this is in the just post Civil War, so in the late 1860s. Right during the 1860s is when this took place, and there were all these gangs that were divided up that all frequented the 5 Points, the 5 corners, and there was a little park in the middle. And there was a great movie made by Scorsese that really, if you want to watch a good movie, that was very well done, and the history in it is amazing. But that showed the squalor of the day. And Charles Dickens, not long after that, a couple of decades after that, maybe, came over, and he was a big humanitarian. And Charles Dickens toured New York City, and he was taken to Paradise Square, which is the 5 Points, that park in the middle, not really a park. And he wrote about the squalor in the streets, how it was raw sewage in the streets. The poor lived there. And I think this is the way London was. We get these grandiose pictures like, Shakespeare in Love, and some of the movies that we've seen and things, the visuals that we get of London 300-400 years ago. But there was only certain districts, I believe, of London that were, you could call them livable. The rest was common folk, and there was a lot of squalor. And for the buildings like this to burn for 4 days, do you know, off the top of your head, was the fire, I know it was very widespread, but did it affect the richer homes? Or okay, it did.
It wasn't choosy. It wasn't choosy. But if you can imagine the Lord, we have a mayor of London, even now. But back then, the Lord Mayor of London was woken up, and he was so angry that he'd been woken up, And even though he went to see the fire, they asked him for permission to destroy houses to stop the fire spreading. And he said, no, you can't destroy the houses. And he was so confident that the fire could be extinguished.
Right.
He went back to bed.
Well,
so that was helpful, wasn't it? Because it's like absolutely the mayor of London. But the thing is, actually, no, it didn't. It actually spread to the St. Paul's Cathedral, which is, if everybody's aware, that's the cathedral that Princess of Wales, Princess Diana, and Prince Charles married in. The fire raged, and it actually destroyed St. Paul's Cathedral. And it took 30 minutes after the building caught fire, Scotty, for the lead roof to melt. Just 30 minutes. Wow. That is not long at all.
No, that's how hot that was at that point. Not that fire isn't hot anyway, but I've got here
getting buckets out the River Thames. You know what I mean?
Speaking of buckets, it says here, I've got in front of me, by the 4th of September, half of London was in flames. That's 2 days after it started. Half of London. The King, Charles II himself, joined the firefighters, passing buckets of water to them in an attempt to quell the flame, but the fire raged on. And as a last resort, I think you mentioned this, gunpowder was used to blow up houses that lay in the path of the fire, and so to create an even bigger fire break. But the sound of the explosions started rumors that a French invasion was taking place. I mean, this is a big city, and nobody's on the phone or the internet, obviously. No. And all they know is their city's burning. Now they're being told there's a rumor that there's a French invasion is going on, and even more panic. And refugees just poured out of the city. St. Paul's Cathedral was caught into flames, like you said. The acres of lead on the roof melted, poured down on the street like a river. Molten lead pouring off the cathedral. And like a river, and the great cathedral itself collapsed. And luckily, the Tower of London escaped the inferno. And eventually the fire was brought under control by the 6th.
They were quite scared, obviously, that it would reach the Tower of London, because that's just on the outskirts. And all the gunpowder, the whole city supply of gunpowder was in. And if the Tower of London had gone up, you've got all the crown jewels, and it would have just been horrendous. So they were really, really scared. And they used gunpowder.
It says that only 1/5 of London was left standing after the fire was extinguished. Virtually all the civic buildings had been destroyed, as well as 13,000 private dwellings. But amazingly, only 6 people died. And hundreds of thousands, imagine this now, hundreds of thousands of people were left homeless. 89 parish churches, the Guildhall, numerous other public buildings, jails. Imagine being locked up in jail at that time. Jails, markets, and 57 halls were now just burnt out shells. And the loss of property was estimated at $5 million to $7 million, which, somebody do the calculation. What was $5 million in 1666? Pounds, I'm sorry, 5 million pounds in 1666 compared to today.
But if you
give you an idea.
Think about it, though, they say only 6 people died. However, some historians reckon that hundreds of people were actually killed, but their bodies were never found because they were trapped under the fire and they were burnt to nothing. And that's, I would actually say that could be true. There was more deaths, but because the fire was so hot and so intense, that they wouldn't really have stand a chance. But also in September, you imagine London in September, we're starting to come towards autumn time. People would have lost their home trying to keep warm. Money, there wasn't any benefit system. There wasn't any national health system back then. It was like, I've lost my home. So they set up camps for people on the outskirts of town. And and reduced number of houses means there was no rents to pay, so there was no money coming in because their houses have been burnt down, so they can't actually pay any rent, so
nothing to pay for.
they were homeless. I think the problem is, when you look back at that, there were so many factors that made that fire worse, but actually there were benefits from the fire, because since that fire of London, London very much changed the way things were looked. But I was just reading down here what you wrote, because there was no insurance package back then.
No.
There was no fire.
Your house was not insured.
There's no, I mean, if you can imagine that, it says the cost of the fire was estimated to be 10 million, Scotty.
10
and
million.
London's annual income was only 12,000.
Wow.
I mean, how the hell can you do that? So when St. Paul's burnt down, that's a beautiful cathedral. So Christopher Wren, he planned the new city to rebuild London, and it took 30 years. And the site where the fire first started is now marked by a 202-foot monument. They built it between 1671 and 1677. And I think when people go to London and they look at it today and they want to look at the history, they want to go to the Tower of London, they want to go to Madame Tussauds, they want to go to, the theatre and everything like that. Imagine being caught in an amazing fire. You can't get out of it, and you're running from it, really. The animals would have died in this fire. Horses, dogs, cats, they would have died in it. Cattle, they would have died in it as well. So people that had their own stalls, their own businesses, where they would shut their stall perhaps and take their stuff home, all gone. They had nothing left. So it's just like, where do we go from here? And also then comes the famous conspiracy, because what year did this fire happen but 666?
1666.
Which, of course, is the famous number of the beast, 1666. And some people have said it was karma for people enjoying themselves, having too much fun, for kicking their heels up. Some people said it was that. Other people have said, like you say, it was caused by foreigners or Catholics. And they were looking for a scapegoat, and they actually did hang someone over the Great Fire of London.
And didn't somebody confess?
Well, if you'd been taken somewhere and everything tortured you, I think you might confess as well, because at the end of the day, yes, someone did actually. He was innocent. Absolutely, he was 100% innocent. Robert Hubert, or Hubert as we would have called him,
yes,
he was a watchmaker from France, and he was executed. Basically, you're talking now 1666. He was executed following his false confession of starting the Great Fire of London.
They called him in what I'm looking at. They called him a demented French watchmaker called Lucky Hubert. Lucky was his nickname. That he confessed to starting the fire deliberately, and justice was swift. He was rapidly hanged. But it was sometime later, however, that it was realized that he couldn't have started it because he wasn't even in England at the time.
I mean, some people actually like to commit to some or confess to something to get that recognition, don't they?
Right.
But his confession changed when he learned that the fire never reached Westminster. It didn't get to the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben. Having learned that the fire started at Pudding Lane in the heart of a baker, he then claimed to have thrown a crude fire grenade through the open window of the bakery. He claimed to have acted with accomplices who stopped the watercocks to sabotage the effort to put out the fire. His confession motive was apparently that he was a French spy and an agent of the Pope. But as you're right, he wasn't even in London. He didn't even arrive in London to 2 days after the fire. But I think also as well, I mean, I'm sure he didn't expect I think he probably had mental health, issues.
They say he was demented, according to this article.
Yeah.
So,
and I would imagine he was tortured quite a lot.
they tortured him.
Yeah. He would
And
have had
I mean,
extreme
let's get him to confess. So
it would have been an extreme form of torture. You're talking 1666.
yes,
England was very, very good at torturing people. In those days, we either burnt, beheaded, boiled, cut them into 4 quarters, boiled their heads, put their heads on things. So he would have been really tortured. And I'm not being funny, but you actually would. I probably would confess.
Well, yeah, if that was your only alternative at the time, or have every bone in your body broken and snapped and crushed and God knows what else done to you. So
the jury stated that he did not have the fear of God in his eyes, but was moved and led away by the instigation of the devil. He was hanged at Tyburn, London on the 27th of October, and his body was handed to the Company of Barber Surgeons for dissection, and it was torn apart. It was torn apart by a crowd of Londoners. How?
Oh boy. And we all know crowd mentality, so he didn't have to have done anything. All you have to do is have the crowd believing you did something, and so
I mean, so from the fire, lots of good things happened as well.
Yes.
And I want to bring that in because that's really important. It changed London forever. And one of them was the fact that we now have a fire brigade. They started to, realize that they were going to have to make things so much better.
By the way, that's the monument on the spot on Pudding Lane where the fire took place in London.
So they made up new rules that all buildings had to be in future, they had to be brick or stone. You had to have really wide streets. You had to have a height restriction on buildings, and there were no houses near the river. Old streets were rebuilt, and trades using fire must be placed together. So they made up this, from the legacy of the fire, living conditions improved for most Londoners. And also insurance companies started to set up. Homeowners could then start to pay small sums of money to insure their home. And this was also the beginning of, if a fire started, the employees of the insurance company would come and put out your fire. And this was the beginning of an organized fire brigade. Nice. So it did a lot. I mean, it was, rebuilding London was really, really important. But not only that, I would imagine if I was the King of England, it would absolutely think, I need to do something so this never happens again, because they would have lost money from rent. They would have lost money from shops. They would have lost, I mean, this city was so hot, so hot on fire that they say the skin and flesh of the city's buildings were taken. So you imagine the building, there was just a little bit left.
Well,
as well.
The way it was looked at too at the time was that although the Great Fire was this major catastrophe, it was considered afterwards to have cleansed the city. The overcrowding, the disease-ridden streets were all destroyed. And what did they have to do now? As you mentioned, they could build a new London, and a new London emerged.
I have to pick up Matthew's point now. Matthew, you're behind there. Oliver Cromwell would not later take over. Oliver Cromwell was before the Great Fire of London, because Charles I had been killed, and it was now Charles II in charge. So this is not Oliver Cromwell did not later take power. I have to pull you up on that. But let me tell you about this fire, though, Scotty, as well. It didn't end in October. It was still burning in March the following year. Because there were so many nooks and crannies, and also there was a lot of crime being built up, a lot of gangs trying to rob people and leave them for dead, and people that didn't have any homes who were on the street. There was a lot of There was a lot
And
of
you've
crime.
got to imagine I don't have an historical account in front of me, but you've got to imagine the looting that was taking place with people digging through the ruins.
Absolutely looking for stuff. And also, England at the time was involved in a costly war with the Dutch Republic, and they were building up for one last battle, and it was called the Second Anglo-Dutch War, which was 3 maritime wars to be fought between the English and Dutch. Believe it or not, I mean, I always thought we were pretty friendly with them, but apparently not. And by September 1666, there were 5 major engagements: the Battle of Lowestoft, the Battle of Vegan, the 4 Days Battle, St. James's Battle, and Holmes bonfire. So some thought that the Dutch had done this, that they had set London alight to get people going, and so you can imagine that actually got people going, because when the attack was celebrated with bonfires and bells in London, because what happens is we retaliated against them and ended up like going out there and destructing 150 Dutch ships and torching a town. They did not like the English celebrating the fact that we done something well there. But I also think it's really important to remember that, imagine if you were really sick and ill and disabled in that time. There would have been a lot of ill people. There would have been a lot of elderly people that, there was no medicine, that you couldn't take care of yourself. And you've lost your home. You've lost your, people have perished. Where are you going to go? Who's going to take care of you?
Right.
There's no hospitals really of that time. There was no, you were out on the street, or you were at go to a church and hope that they would take pity on you. So I think that when you're looking at this event, it changed London forever. And you and I have talked about the other, but also I just want to remember this. John Evelyn was the other diarist. Samuel Pepys was one. John Evelyn was the other. And he said there was a foul smell in the air of the time of the fire, caused by the bodies, beds, and combustible goods of some poor creatures. And
you can only imagine.
He also writes of helpless infants left amidst the fire. The letters from London speak of the terrible sights of persons burning to death and burnt limbs, making it easy to believe the terror, though it cannot be easily described. The old, tender children and many sick and helpless people were all burned in their beds and served as fuel for the fire. This is why they didn't find more bodies.
Right.
Even Louis of France offered to help by sending stuff over to help us, because he could not and he would not tolerate, Louis of France, any rejoicings about the great fire. But I think, when you and I were talking about it yesterday, what we wanted to bring up was how the great, as Matthew says, the Great Fire of London was predicted. One Mr. Light came to have been asked by a zealous papist, "You expect great things in 1966 and think that Rome will be destroyed," meaning the Vatican, "but what if it is London?" And meanwhile, 5 months before the fire, Elizabeth Stiles claimed to have been told by a Frenchman that at some point between June and October, there would not be a house left between Temple Bar and London Bridge. And then in 1651, an astrologer named William Lilly created a pamphlet calling Monarchy or No Monarchy, that contained illustrative predictions of the future state of England. And these images show a city blazing with fire, but also scenes of naval warfare, infestations of rodents, mass death and starvation. And unsurprisingly, they went and got Lilly and called him in for questioning following the fire of 1666. So people were predicting this before it even happened. But let's be honest, you wouldn't have to be a very great psychic to look at the state of London at that time and realize it was a timber box.
You'd have to be. And or to see it any clearly. But predicting disasters, we've seen that happen for a very long time. So this was predicted. Was there any? Do you? Let me ask you this, because you live there in London, near London, south of London. Are there remnants today where you can walk through? Because I know you can walk through London today. You can see the old Roman walls from 2,000 years ago in several different sections. Some in people's back gardens, there's sections of the Roman wall. Can you see, are there any kind of course, if it's burned to the ground, but anything that's a remnant or anything, would the remnants more be and this is the new place that was built on top of the one that burned down? Is that the only kind of remnant you find that reminds you of the fire?
There are quite a few buildings that did survive London. So if you could actually get, when you come into London, you could actually walk around and go, yeah, that survived. There are a few things. There are a few remnants that I guess if you could Google, you would find them that maybe been left. But I'm just trying to look here what was left. There was a few wine stores. There was a few pubs left alone. St. Bartholomew's Gatehouse, that was left alone. The Guildhall, luckily, but it had some burning, but it actually didn't burn to the ground, which was pretty cool. Of course, London Bridge, which we
London Bridge.
There were lots of churches. The Tower of London, because it was protected by its large walls, so it was completely untouched by the flames because it was so high and so well protected. It didn't actually get anything. So yes, when you walk around London today and you'd go to Pudding Lane, and if you were to walk everywhere around that particular area, you might find a few things, but to be honest, not many was left untouched, because there's just a few left, not many.
Right. What are you going to have after a fire? But you do have structures that didn't get burned down that are there. I've been to the Tower of London, and I've seen it. And to think that survived it is pretty amazing. So
it says that people were running to the Thames and flinging their goods off the side, and they would stay in their house as long as they could until the fire touched them. Even the pigeons, it was noted, were transfixed by the fire, loath to leave their houses, and they hovered above the windows until their wings caught fire and they fell back down to earth.
Oh wow!
My goodness, that's quite a vision, isn't it?
Yes. Well, there was I know we talked about the Tower of London a bit yesterday too, because I asked you, did the original Tower of, or not, I'm sorry, not the Tower, London Bridge. And I said, did London Bridge burn down in this fire? And it was, even though the fire jumped the river, it didn't burn down the bridge.
No, and London Bridge, there's been two London Bridges. Obviously, we've got the one that was built in 1967, but the original London Bridge is actually in Arizona now.
It is. Folks,
you
if you didn't know that, if you want to walk on the original London Bridge, it was all taken down and shipped brick by brick to Arizona. And it's reconstructed in Arizona today, here in the United States.
Lake Hazard, is it Lake Hazard? I can pronounce this right.
Now, which incarnation of London Bridge was that? Was that the London Bridge that was standing in the 1600s still?
See, there's a little snippet we were talking about yesterday. When they built bridges, there was a belief that they couldn't build bridges unless they were built on a live body. Like a sacrifice was put underneath. And so there are talks that London Bridge, when it was built, the original one, there were live bodies, sacrifices put. And we're going back, I'm trying to bring up when it actually was done. But London Bridge, let's see. I've got it here somewhere. Let me have a look. Yeah, the London Bridge started around 1209. And the London Bridge caught fire numerous times. Fire of 1212, trapping residents in the middle. Those who weren't killed by the fire died when they jumped into the Thames and drowned. There was more rebellions in 1381, 1450, and the bridge was destroyed in 1633 when it caught fire again. The Great Fire of London destroyed the bridge a bit further on, but the fire 30 years prior created a gap that prevented the fire from spreading. So half of it did get destroyed, half of it didn't. And the bridge again caught fire in 1725. But during the Tudor era, the homes on the bridge were 7 stories high, Scotty.
That's crazy. And full of buildings.
And hung around 7 feet over the edge. So traffic would have been awful. Flood waters would have been a major issue. Many boats capsized. Crews were killed. The bridge was also, I mean, this is something that I know that we talked about yesterday, which you said to me that's really important to you when we talked about it. London Bridge is the setting for a lot of famous executions.
Yes.
And a very, very famous man, as you well know, head was actually put on there. Do you remember who I told you it was?
Yes, I do. If you remember from the movie, his head was set on a pike on London Bridge, and his arms were sent to different, and his legs were sent to. Does anybody out there, without looking it up, have you ever heard, or do you know? Can you give us a good guess whose head was put on London Bridge at the entryway? And by the way, he wasn't the only one. Infamous criminals their heads were mounted on pikes. There it is. Matthew Sainsbury knows it. William Wallace.
Of course he does.
His head was put on London Bridge. And I've got a couple of neat photos here I want to show you. And oops, of course, while I'm talking, I can't do anything. What do they say about multitasking? It means you're doing 2 or 3 different things, only half-assed.
That's
so
okay. We're trying to give out a lot of information.
Going to this here. This is just a model because we have no pictures, of course, of what it would have looked like in the day. But this is a model that was built to give a representation of what London Bridge looked like in the 1600s. And then I've got some ink drawings, some etchings that I want to show you after that. But this right here is how London Bridge would have looked less crowded. This is London Bridge, the stone part of the bridge. That stone part of the bridge is what was taken apart piece by piece, brick by brick, and shipped to Arizona, and now stands in Arizona. But in the 1600s and later, you had all these buildings atop. People had homes and shops. And you can see, just by the look of that, some of these buildings are 3 and 4 stories tall above the level of the bridge itself. And they were packed to where there was no spaces in between the buildings. There was a lane down the middle and then buildings all along the other side.
I think Matthew's trying to do our job here and filling people in with information. It's like, hang on, Matthew, give us a chance to talk about it.
There you go. And so this picture is a line drawing, an etching, I think, from the day. This would have been in the 1600s, late 1600s, that this was sketched. And here you see from the south of London, looking across London Bridge, and you see all the buildings on London Bridge. This is what it would have looked like. And there were archways. The buildings even spanned the way along the bridge, and you had like tunnels. It was like covered bridges, and it was full of buildings. Now, I want you to note something. Look down in the lower right-hand corner. As you're coming off the road on the south side of London onto the bridge, there's a little portico there, or an entryway to the bridge. I'm going to bring up a little closer shot of that. Well, this is a different sketch, but you can see right there. Look on the top of this entryway to the bridge. See all the pikes standing there? And in the day when this was drawn, I think this might have been before the fire. I think this was 1653, something like that, when this was drawn. But you see all the heads on the pikes?
Yes.
That's where they would put the heads on the pikes. And if I go back out to this drawing, yeah, it's a little different drawing, but you can see all the heads on the pikes there.
Well, William Wallace was his head was the first to be boiled, tarred, and displayed on a pike. And over the next 300 years, countless people and enemies and criminals would have their heads cut off and stuck on a pike, including Guy Fawkes and Oliver Cromwell. And apparently in 1598, a German tourist claimed to see 30 heads on display on the British front gate. Can you imagine that? Like coming over to see London as a tourist, and it's like, whose head is that? You know,
well, in this drawing alone, you've got a dozen heads up there.
Apparently they stopped doing that in the 1700s. I would imagine they did. It's pretty gruesome. But the interesting that you and I were talking about was that the human remains were found under the bridge while it was being dismantled in the 1960s. And there used to be a process called, if I can get this right, immurement. People were buried alive under a bridge while it was being built as a ritual to ensure that the bridge would stand the test of time. And the current London Bridge was completed, the one in London now, was completed in 1972. And was very, very uneventful until the 2010s, when there were two terrorist attacks in 2017 and 2019, which took the lives of 8 people. But that's a macabre thought, that they actually sacrificed people, and put them under bridges to make sure that the bridge survived.
Where did that the belief of I'm looking this up as I'm talking.
Be pagan. That would be pagan, I would imagine. Very much so.
Let's see. I just want to see if this tells us anything about this. The belief of burying live people beneath bridges. Well, I don't see anything specific to this. Just something, ancient submerged bridge in Spain reveals that humans were buried beneath it. Human sacrifices under London Bridge. Now, that's what I wanted to see. Let's see. With the London Bridge, you know the song, right? They started out, okay. Somebody who's writing this says, I watched an old movie called My Fair Lady. It's a musical, folks, if you don't know which one it is, with Rex Harrison and Katharine Hepburn. Oh, no. Yeah. Not Katharine Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn. It's about a flower girl, Eliza, a real cockney from old London, and she meets an old professor, and he trains her to speak and act like a high-class lady. And anyway, he says, I heard that My Fair Lady might have something to do with London Bridge. You know the song, right? They start out trying to build it back up with wood and clay. Then they finish it with gold and silver. And there was a reading of the film that said that Eliza symbolized the bridge or something along those lines. But that reminds me of a far more sinister theory, that the fair lady in that song is actually an immurement, a sacrifice burned alive in the foundations of the bridge to keep it standing. And God only knows if there's any truth to it. And so that's very interesting. And you think of course, the nursery rhyme, London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. And that they might be speaking to, you and I were talking to this yesterday, they might be speaking to the Virgin Mary. They might be speaking, I thought it was to a queen, but it might be to the sacrifice of a young woman who was placed under the bridge. And London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady.
If you look at the Egyptian pyramids and also the Aztec pyramids, they were live sacrifices put underneath the pyramids. They know there was live sacrifices put underneath the Aztecs ones for sure, because it was practice of the fact that it was, to keep them strong and protected and thanks and everything. So it wouldn't surprise me if in London in the early days of Druid and pagan, etc., whether or not that was a practice.
Right. That's just crazy when you think about it. But there were a lot of those pagan rituals carried over. And by the way, I was going to show, and I didn't download it yet, so I'll talk while I'm doing this. I showed you the picture of what London Bridge looks like, or would have looked like in the model of what it would have looked like during its heyday. Now, there is, if you have never seen it, London Bridge standing in Arizona is looks like this. I've got several different pictures, and I just want to get the best picture I can find here to show it up close. We'll just take this one, and I'll upload it as I'm talking. So somebody bought, and I don't remember who did it. It would be a much more neat historic show if I could say, and so paid for this bridge to be brought over. And I thought you told me yesterday, Wendy, but I don't remember. But they brought that bridge over to Arizona because it was bought, and then they built the new London Bridge, which I've been on as well. Very modern new bridge in London. But I've never been to the one in Arizona. And that is this bridge. I'm going to put this in the right place so I can show you all what it looks like. And this is, now you saw that picture I put up of the model of what London Bridge looked like. And that is this photograph, once again, this one right here. Now take a look at the stone part of the structure to erase the buildings in your mind's eye and just look at the bridge itself. Now, this is the bridge that was brought over to Arizona, and that one looks like this. I've got to grab it so I can bring it in. Here it is. So you go to Arizona today, Lake. I can't remember where it was or what city it's by.
It is. I can tell you that it's Lake Havasu City.
Havasu. And here it is today. Now get a picture of that model in your head. Here it is today. This is London Bridge rebuilt in Arizona. And so you could actually go to Arizona and walk on the original stone version of London Bridge. How about that?
Colin comes up with a really interesting point. Why did London Bridge go to? Well, because a gentleman came over here, and I'm just bringing up.
Came over and bought it in money. Money speaks.
Let me see his name. Robert P. McCulloch was an entrepreneur and a real estate developer, and he founded Lake Havasu City in Arizona. And when the bridge was originally built in 1830s, it spanned the whole of the River Thames. And in 1968, the bridge was purchased from the City of London by Robert P. McCulloch, but he only had the exterior granite blocks from the original bridge cut and transported for use in the construction of a new bridge. The only parts of the new London Bridge that made it to Arizona were the exterior masonry. The bridge was completed in 1971, but the original 1831 bridge is the one that was taken over there as well. Mm-hmm. The thing that's interesting about London Bridge in Arizona, which I found quite fascinating, was the fact that they have seen ghosts in Arizona, yes, of a British bobby walking down on the bridge.
Yes.
They've also had seeing people in Victorian dresses. And they've also seen a woman a ghost of a woman in a black dress. She's walking quickly across the bridge, clutching her handbag. And some have seen her jump into the water at night. Interesting, she never hits the water, but disappears right before impact. Some say the souls of old London are forever trapped. The centuries of death from fire, rebellions, and drownings may be keeping numerous spirits attached to the bridge, potentially. And the ghosts of criminals and England's perceived enemies may also be wandering around, still angry about having their heads on display over the bridge. But most people feel there's a dark energy that follows them when they cross the bridge, following them home. And because there's this theory about ritual sacrifices being made under the original London Bridge.
Yes.
While it was still in London. Their ghosts and spirits, they reckon, might still be angered by this, but who knows? And also, an interesting fact, the metal that was used to make the light posts that are on London Bridge were melted down from the cannons of Napoleon when they were confiscated after his death.
Wow.
Those cannons were used to kill thousands on the battlefields, meaning that even lights on the London Bridge are stained with blood. But one of the most creepiest stories about London Bridge is from two Lake Havasu residents who claimed to hear voices while walking home one night. A mother and son began to hear strange, angry voices encouraging them to jump off the bridge as they crossed the river. The mother was overcome with sickness, and both had a sense of unease and fear, which lasted for months. And other Lake Havasu city residents claim to have similar stories. Drivers have seen dark figures floating above them, which follows them as they drive across the bridge, only to leave them alone when reaching the other side. Others have seen screams coming from the bridge and within the tunnels. Yes, I mean, literally, this bridge is got its own history. And of course, if we remember the new London Bridge, which you and I talked about yesterday, the London Bridge experience, when they were doing some excavation work of the new London Bridge to make the London Bridge experience, they came up and builders found skeletons underneath the bridge, and they were so freaked out by this, they put down
wait under the bridge in Arizona.
No, when the old London Bridge went to Arizona, we built a new one
under the foundations of the old London Bridge.
So under the new London Bridge, they were doing some work and some excavation on a new tourist attraction called the London Bridge Experience, and they're right next door to each other. And when they were doing this excavation work to build the London Bridge Experience, they found these skeletons. And builders were saying that, the tools were going they were disappearing, light bulbs were blowing for no reason, and they refused to work in there. They said, we're not going to work unless someone comes along with a medium and sorts it out. And they thought they were mucking around at first. They thought, no. But apparently it got so bad, they just wouldn't go in there on their own.
Wow.
And when they did go in there, they found... a second haul of bones was found under concrete 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And they also found that some of the heads had holes in their skulls. And it was actually original plague pit. So actually that area where the London Bridge experience
because and I don't know if we mentioned this at the very beginning, the London fire took place in 1666. What happened 1 year earlier? The plague went through London in 1665. And of course, it had earlier as well, but interesting. So, by the way, this is a picture of the main page of the London Bridge Experience, which is like an attraction that you can go visit in London. And I put a link up if you want to go see what they're all about. It's kind of interesting. So, and I did mention, and I put in a link, that the show Ghost Adventures, Zach Baggins and crew, they went to the London Bridge in Lake Havasu, Arizona, and they did an investigation there. And I've got to look that one up again, but put a link if you're interested in the paranormal side of this. They got some very creepy stuff off of that bridge when they did a paranormal investigation there. So worth taking a look at. I put the link in the chat room. Fun to watch, something like that. So
it's interesting. I mean, London is a very, very old city, and
yes.
they found Roman remains even underneath London Bridge Station. They also found an old bathhouse as well. But one thing I thought about us looking at in future ones is the old Bedlam, the Bedlam Mental Hospital. Yes. And they found 300 bodies in there, and because that's now the Imperial War Museum. But I think it's worth looking at. So I think that London, everybody knows that England and London has so much history and so many spooky stuff as well. But I think it's the thought that actually were people sacrificed and put under some of these buildings. That is a terrible thought, because up until recent times, we in England did not want to think about things like that under that building, under that bridge, could have been sacrificed. People giving, had no choice, tied up, given their life or whatever. So when we talked about the fire, because this actually happened, if you think about how many hundreds of years ago is that, 17, 18, 19, what, 400 or so?
Well, if you're talking 1600s, 400 years ago, thereabouts.
400 years ago this week, today, London was burning. London was burning.
66, so it would have been, 240 years ago. Or I'm sorry, 340 years ago. So
and I just think that, it was a fascinating subject because we wanted to bring it up, because here we are exactly on the exact week that it happened. On the actual day, yesterday, it started yesterday. And I thought, what a fascinating story. Also to know about the paranormal side of it as well. The London Bridge that's over in Arizona. How fascinating to hear that over there.
Yeah.
Like British ghosts.
I know.
On a British bridge in Arizona.
Right.
That's just crazy.
So it's crazy that that's there. So
the energy is obviously still there.
And there's a lot of different things we could keep talking about this, especially as we get into the paranormal side. But we've got to start looking at wrapping up for today. For as much as we could go on. We've already gone an hour and 20 minutes on this. That's crazy. Or an hour and 15 minutes.
It's been a fascinating subject. I hope everybody's enjoyed it.
It's a very interesting subject. So, and folks, if you ever get a chance to go over to London, there's a lot of tours to go see, to see the history of London, the things that have gone on there. You talk about, I was just watching a series, I think it's a history hit series and it was a short series, I believe, but several long episodes on the history of London. And they go back to, 2,000 years ago, when London was originally built. Its original name was not Londinium. It was something a little shorter. And then it changed very quickly, became Londinium under Roman rule. And that city has sat on this spot for 2,000 years. And it was built on a marsh on the north side of the river. And the ships would come in off the ocean, up the estuary, into the Thames, and that city just grew. The city had been plundered many times. It had been Viking raids burned it to the ground, and they rebuilt right away. And it became, each successive incarnation of London became bolder and more cosmopolitan. And so all the way up to yeah. And
when you come over, Scotty, well, I'll have to take you to the new London Bridge.
Yes, I want to see. I've been on that bridge 20 years ago with some friends. We just walked out so we could walk out in the middle and go, I'm on London Bridge. And you can see, if you're looking south, you can see St. Paul's Cathedral dome right over the buildings right in front of the bridge, if I remember right.
Well, the story was, I think that Robert thought, the guy who bought it, I think he wanted Tower Bridge, but he ended up with London Bridge because obviously Tower Bridge is the big London Bridge. But I think he ended up with London Bridge instead.
And Tower Bridge is the one that you think of when you think of the bridge in London. It's with the two big towers and the bridge in between. It's right by the Tower of London. Mm-hmm. So I've got some great photos of my friends and I standing at the Tower of London with the bridge behind us.
You can actually, there's the whole Tower Bridge experience. They've got a restaurant on there now. They've got a glass platform, so you can walk across the Thames with the Thames underneath from you. I mean, I've not done it, but I know people that have, and they say it's a really good day out.
Fun. Well, we are going to have to do that when I come over there.
Spend your money. And, it's been so nice to be back, Scotty. It's so nice to be back.
It is good to be back. And we say that several times because we've had several lapses in our show for no other reason than circumstances in life. So it's good to be back. We keep the show out there. We keep billing it. And so it's here. And we'll be back again next Tuesday. Well, we hope you all enjoyed today's show. And we don't know what we're talking about next week, but trust me, we have a whole bag full of topics. So it's not like we're topicless and we're going to go out wandering in the dark with a blindfold on, wondering what we're going to talk about next week. No. We'll just reach into the grab bag, pull out a few topics and say, which one do we want to do this week?
Yeah, we talked about it the other day with a couple of topics. And I think we haven't forgotten the Jack the Ripper show.
Yes.
That I need to obviously get in touch with that you guys again, but that would be an amazing show. So there will be a Jack the Ripper show coming up.
There will be. And I remember when I first joined Taps Paramag as the editor-in-chief. This is the Ghost Hunters official magazine. And we had a bunch of articles that we had put a call out for. And we had one of the first issues that I did was it had a big cover story on Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
And somebody who had presented his information on Jack the Ripper, different theories, and there are all different kinds of modern theories. And now, isn't there something, without getting into it, something about they were able to run the DNA of some of the blood that was found on the apron of one of the murder victims that wasn't her blood.
Yeah.
And and it led them to somebody that had once been somebody that they believed to have been a suspect, which is very telling.
I mean, the thing is, I don't think we'll 100% ever know, but I think if you can get as near as damn it. But the gentleman who's written a book on Jack the Ripper as well, was very happy to come on. So that's something we haven't forgotten. We haven't forgotten the Jack the Ripper show. And you and I also have a fantastic one. We did talk about it, and we probably might do that next week. And that's something that people, I think, will really, really enjoy. And it's it will be a paranormal and also a real life situation. And we talked about San Francisco in one department, and then without naming the other one in Britain to give it away, because we like to keep you all waiting. They're very much comparable. So I think it would be really interesting. If you tune in next week, it'll be a really good show.
Yes. And so we'll see you again here 1 week from today with that particular story. So you all hang on tight, and we appreciate your being here. Thanks for showing up. And we will see you a little later. Ranny is just saying here, let me put it up there, Rowan needs a ride. So good thing we're ending right now, because I've got to go give my daughter a ride. So
until next week.
So we'll see you all next week. And thanks for being along with us. And that's all we got for today.
Yep.
So as I like to normally say, live long and prosper. And Wendy, love you. I'll see you next time.
See you. Bye.